All right. Hi, everyone. Can you all see and hear me? Excellent. Okay, so today is the first of the special topics lectures. And if you saw my announcement, I decided to simplify things a bit because I was a little bit late getting the poll going. Although a lot of you have voted in the poll, which is great. But what I decided to do is just do Canadian cryptozoology today. And then on Wednesday, I will lecture on the topic that wins the poll. I don't know what that will be yet, because the poll closes tonight. So I've got to squeeze all this prep uh, into tomorrow somehow, but no problem. I can do it. Um, but I will announce what the winning topic was once the poll closes. Before we get to today's lecture, I also wanted to show you something. I have prepared another template for the second reflection assignment. And you can find that in the helpful materials module. So right here. So that's, I've changed the name of this one so that you don't get anything mixed up. You're going to want to go down to the second one, reflection assignment 2 template, open that up. And this contains instructions for the second reflection assignment. It's going to be a lot like the first one. Um, Now, in the course outline, I labeled this as sort of like examining belief change, but I've kind of changed my approach. What I'd like you to do for this one is, as the instructions state here, describe a paranormal phenomenon that we have looked at in class, or one from outside of the class, if you want. Give me a detailed description of the phenomenon you've chosen, outline whatever claims you can find about the veracity of the phenomenon, tell me about evidence for the phenomenon, etc. Aim for like one long paragraph or two shorter ones, and make sure that you choose a topic that's different from the one you're writing your essay on. That's important. Then you're going to critique the claims concerning that phenomenon, right? And even if it is something you believe in, I still want you to try this. I still want you to apply your skeptical toolbox, your baloney detection kit. This is not um, geared towards altering your beliefs so much as it is, directed towards um, investigating whether your beliefs meet the epistemic standard of knowledge, right? And because remember, that's what skepticism is really about. Skepticism, as I say here, is not doubting for the sake of doubting, right? Skepticism from skepsis means to investigate. And specifically, it means to investigate whether your beliefs meet the epistemic standards required for knowledge. You don't have to get too philosophical with this. It's not like I want you to show me how your the phenomenon you've chosen, whether belief in that phenomenon counts as a justified true belief or a false belief with poor justification. You can do that if you want to, but this is not an epistemology class, right? So if you're not familiar with this stuff, well, try and learn about it if you can. But if you want to do this your own way, that's fine too. What I want you to do is simply to critique the phenomenon or claims about the phenomenon that you've chosen. Remember, this does not mean just dismissing. Critiquing, it's like when you hear I don't know, a review of a film or a TV show from a critic, right? They might just say it's straight up terrible, but they give you reasons why it's terrible, or they'll give you reasons why it's good. Do something like that here, right? There are more instructions down here. Remember to delete all of the instructions before you submit. The rubric has not changed, so it's about the same as the first one. You're doing the same sort of thing in two parts, offering some discussion in two parts. But instead of describing an experience and reflecting on it, you're describing a claim about a paranormal phenomenon and critiquing that claim, right? So very similar, but also different, importantly different in certain respects. Um, in the course outline, I've set the due date as this Friday, but I think I'd like to give you a little bit more time. I think I'd like to give you the weekend to finish this. So that's what I'll do. I will change the due date to Monday, next Monday, not today. How's that sound to everybody? Excellent. Oh yeah, and how much is that worth? Let's check the course outline because that is not changing. I can't remember. I'm not a terrible professor, I hope, but I'm terrible at some things like remembering how much I've made certain assignments worth. Yes, 5%. Okay, good, good, good. Yeah. So it's no problem having it due in the last week of class because if it's over, I think 20%, you can't do that close to the end of class, but it's only 5%. So is it? Uh, oh, you're right. It's participant. See, I get things mixed up. I'm sorry, everybody. It was the participation element I was thinking about that was examining belief change. Yeah, the proposal grades. Good question. So I'm going to mark some examples for the TAs today and tomorrow, and then all of us are going to work together and try and get that done for next week too. And that way, you have the whole exam period to take your proposal, turn it into the essay. Okay, so never mind. I guess I'm not extending this. It was already due on Monday. Thank you for pointing that out, Kalis. I will leave the participation element due the same time. So yeah, I'm looking at the wrong thing. This is worth 15%. Will be due on Monday. Sorry, everybody. It's been a busy summer. And I've got things mixed up. Okay, but one thing I don't have mixed up is cryptozoology. So let's talk about it. Slideshow from beginning. Yeah, the proposal grades. I realize it doesn't seem like a lot of time, but when if we get that done for next week, you'll still have a couple of weeks to get the paper done. And remember, the paper is I think I made it 1,600 to 1,800 words. That's not impossible, right? I'll set up the participation element to tomorrow, likely tomorrow. And it's really going to be very similar to the first one. It's practically the same. What I'm looking to see is whether any beliefs have changed over the course of this class. Okay, so Canadian cryptozoology. What is cryptozoology? Well, according to Loxton and Prothero, the authors of the reading from their book Abominable Science, the term cryptozoology comes from cryptos, which means hidden, and zoe, which means life, usually animal, right? It's the root of our word for zoo, right? A zoo is short for zoological garden. We can't forget the ology part, which comes from logos, right? So the study of hidden animals. And they state, Loxton and Prothero state, the origins of this and related terms such as cryptid and cryptozoological are somewhat unclear and thus a matter for much discussion. And I hope that takes place today. Um, but what we can be reasonably certain of is that cryptid refers to a hidden animal. That's not simply a working definition, but a good definition of what it is that cryptozoologists claim to be searching for. Usually, um, usually it's a creature that appears in folklore or legend or myth, right? But not necessarily. As we'll see today, Bigfoot or Sasquatch is certainly a creature which originated um, from folklore, albeit not in the way you probably think. Um, but there are also animals which were thought to be extinct, um, which cryptozoologists claim are still with us on the planet. So one example would be the Loch Ness Monster, right? The Loch Ness Monster is said to inhabit Loch Ness in Scotland. Um, it's claimed by some to be a pliosaur, which is not a dinosaur, but inhabited the Earth around the same time as the dinosaurs. You know, they were the ones that had fins and long necks and lived in the water, right? Kind of like how I imagine, like if you imagine some kind of underwater, a patasaurus or something, right? With flippers instead of legs. They looked similar to that. If you've seen a picture of the Loch Ness Monster, or I should say an alleged picture of the Loch Ness Monster, you know what I mean, right? Long neck, sort of round body, four fin-like appendages. Is uh is Nessie a pliosaur? Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. Is she a pliosaur? Well, you can probably guess what I'm going to say. I don't think there is a Loch Ness monster. Um, but would it be possible for such a creature to live in a lake? For such a large creature to subsist in that sort of ecosystem? Probably not, but we'll get back to that shortly. So there's two kinds of creatures basically that cryptozoologists are concerned with, right? Um, Creatures from folklore or legend, and creatures which are thought to have gone extinct, but which are not extinct. Now, sometimes we do rediscover creatures that we thought went extinct, but these are not cryptids. Sometimes we call them living fossils, right? Although this term is not super accurate. One example is the coelacanth, which is a kind of lobed-finned fish. We find it in the fossil record starting around 400 million years ago, quite a long time ago. Here's a picture of one, a live coelacanth in the ocean. Now, scientists believe that the coelacanth went extinct 66 million years ago, around the same time, maybe about a million years before the dinosaurs went extinct. That was until one was actually caught off the coast of South Africa in the early 20th century or early mid 20th century. Is it really a living fossil? Not really, because it has changed. It's not exactly the coelacanths we find today are not exactly like the coelacanths we find in the fossil record. Some evolutionary changes have occurred, so it's not like it's completely unchanged from millions and millions of years ago. I would also say it's not a true cryptid. Why? Well, as soon as we realized that it was still alive, well, it just kind of remains within the subject of biology or zoology, right? And cryptozoologists who are interested in seeking out and finding extinct creatures, um, I've never seen one super interested in coelacanths. It's always dinosaurs or something like that, right? Or I guess some people have conjectured that Sasquatch is actually an extant uh, Gigantopithecus, which was a real ape that existed a long time ago, a very, very large ape. And so some people kind of presume that if Sasquatch is out there, it's a Gigantopithecus. Okay, maybe. But if we found some community of Gigantopithecus out there, we wouldn't call them Sasquatch. They would just be identified as ancestors of Gigantopithecus. Um, yeah. Again, you know, if we really found Sasquatch or Bigfoot or Nessie or any other cryptid, it would kind of automatically stop being a cryptid. Um, and it would not be studied by cryptozoologists. It would be studied by real zoologists. Um, so I guess all this is to say is that cryptozoology is very much a pseudoscience. It's something that looks scientific, but which violates a lot of the principles that scientists like to stick to, right? And again, this is related to something I've talked about in this class on and off again, and that's the demarcation problem. How do we distinguish science from pseudoscience? Well, some of the characteristics of science, as we've mentioned many times in this class, are a commitment to naturalism, either metaphysical or methodological. And if you're a naturalist, you believe in the causal closure of the physical. So again, that means, because we haven't brought that up in a while, causal closure of the physical means that every physical event has a sufficient physical cause. There's no need to invoke any other kind of cause, like a supernatural cause or any kind of non-physical cause, because that would be a case of causal overdetermination. The idea that causes precede effects, right? Skepticism. Scientists are skeptical in that they investigate, and they're skeptics also in the Cartesian sense, in that they subject their claims to doubt. We don't really find this in cryptozoology. It's kind of like a wide-eyed, um, like I don't know how to put this, but pseudoscientists, in this case, cryptozoologists, um, are really not skeptical enough. Um, it's not that they believe anything, but they believe a little too much. Science looks for evidence that will either support or falsify a claim. Um, Pseudoscience kind of cherry picks its evidence. It uses evidence that will support a claim while disregarding evidence against that claim. Parsimony, right? Real science tries to be parsimonious. It tries to be simple, right? Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is most likely the correct explanation. Scientists try not to violate this principle of parsimony. We saw this last time when we looked at the difference between astrology and astronomy, which was that last week? Yeah, I think it was last week. Sorry, busy summer. I'm all over the place. And falsifiability, right? Your claims, whatever claim you're making, has to be in principle potentially falsifiable. Doesn't mean we will falsify it, but your claims, your hypotheses need to be formulated in a way that we could potentially falsify them. That's how we test them, right? This is not what happens in cryptozoology, right? Now, this is Canadian cryptozoology, and it turns out there are quite a number of cryptids that are alleged to exist in Canada. One of the more famous, sort of, at least famous domestically, one of the most domestically famous cryptids is the Ogopogo. Maybe you've heard of the Ogopogo. It is claimed that the Ogopogo is a sea creature that lives in Okanagan Lake in British Columbia. Here is a sort of tourist attraction depiction of the Ogopogo, which I found on Wikipedia. Of course, it wasn't always known by this name. In fact, I gotta say, Wikipedia, while not a scholarly source, does have a pretty good article on the Ogopogo with lots of little folklore, lots of other little tidbits. But it probably originates from a being called Naikata, anglicized, or I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. But it's I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce that, but it's an indigenous word which means the sacred being of the water. So originally, what is called Ogopogo now comes from an indigenous tradition where it was a spirit that lived in the water, not an animal. Okay. Now it's kind of been appropriated and commercialized and turned into a bit of a tourist attraction. So I think it's an interesting example of a creature whose existence is rooted in yet removed from the original folklore. And he's actually the subject of a documentary, which I learned came out last year. It's called Cursed Waters, Creature of Lake Okanagan, which is by not a parapsychologist, a cryptozoologist who who's investigating. investigating the existence of Ogopogo, looking into claims of sightings, and so forth. And there are actually a good number of alleged sightings of Ogopogo in Okanagan Lake. I remember this picture, which was brought to my attention last time I taught this course. A student had recently seen a news article on an alleged Ogopogo sighting. And this is a still from a video. It's not very clear, but you can find it in these news sources, right? This is a piece on the documentary that I told you. All of these are from Global News. Here's an alleged sighting and another alleged sighting. This one, I believe, is where this image was taken from. Um, Sometimes you get an image like this of something in the water that you can't identify. And sometimes you'll find if you go and watch these little news features after class, which I highly recommend. Another interesting phenomenon that is claimed as evidence for the existence of Ogopogo are these strange waves that are sometimes observed on Lake Okanagan, which makes it look as though there is a long serpentine creature swimming through the water. Um, there are a number of possible natural explanations for this. One interesting one is otters, um, because there are otters that live in Okanagan Lake, and sometimes these otters swim in a train, one after another. And from a distance, you might mistake these otters kind of, swimming through the water as one long creature rather than multiple smaller creatures. Another possible explanation has to do with how lakes work. So as seasons change, um, water kind of moves around in a lake, right? As the seasons change, you might get water from deep in the lake, basically turning over. And this can create strange looking currents and odd looking waves on the surface. This also happens in shallower lakes, like from day to day, right? Like you get water on the top kind of cooling off and sinking, and then water from underneath coming up, and it can create interesting kinds of currents and stuff. And it also happens seasonally. And so in one of these papers, you will see an analysis like that of some footage of waves that one individual claims is Ogopogo swimming through the water. Of course, the expert looks at it and says, "Well, what that most likely is sort of like this sort of turnover phenomenon of water in the lake." And you've got the same problem with Ogopogo as you've got with Nessie, right? And that is that how does a such a small ecosystem support such a large creature? I haven't seen an analysis like this done with Ogopogo, but I have seen analyses, sort of like analyses of the biosphere and Loch Ness, which illustrate that there is just not enough food to support a creature or a population of creatures as large as Nessie is supposed to be, right? I mean, think about it. Where do we find the largest aquatic creatures? This is a simple question. Somebody better answer. Where do we find the largest aquatic creatures? Yes, of course, the ocean. Yeah, there's big stuff down in the deep ocean for sure, because it's cold and it's oxygen rich. So you get really big things like giant squid, right? Of course, I'm thinking of whales and sharks, right? So whales are very big aquatic mammals. Not all of them are very big, but a lot of them are quite big. In fact, the largest creature ever to exist on the planet Earth is the blue whale, right? And it takes a massive amount of food to feed these things. They've got to swim all over the ocean, eating massive amounts of plankton to sustain their large bodies, right? Humpback whales have to eat krill and herring. Basking sharks and whale sharks eat massive amounts of food. If you're going to be that big, you need to eat a lot. So there's just not enough life, in a lake like Lake Okanagan or in Loch Ness to support creatures of that size. And that I think is the knockdown argument, really. I mean, we see weird stuff in nature. Okay. Maybe it's a creature. It's like we're applying our sort of, our like animistic tendencies that Jens and Freud talked about in those readings we read so many weeks ago. We see some strange waves or something strange in the water that's moving a certain way, and our brains, our Pleistocene era brains, which are still very much evolved for uh, trying to detect what is alive and what is not in our environment. And if it is alive, what it wants with us, right? Our brains are so good at this that they see animacy and mentation even when it's not actually there. So we see some strange waves or something strange under the water, and our brains kind of go to, that's alive and it might want to eat me. Um, or, maybe it wants something else. Maybe we can eat it, right? It doesn't have to be a predator. It could be a prey item, right? But the point is that our brains have kind of evolved to be mind detectors and life form detectors. And we often misidentify non living things as living things. And I think that's what's going on here. How can we be certain? Well, we know how the brain works, we know how the mind works, but we also know that these biospheres just can't support life forms that are that big. I mean, what is the biggest creature, would you say, that can live in fresh water in Canada or around fresh water? What are some of the biggest creatures? It's not just fish. I'll just, seals are pretty, yeah, seals are huge. I don't think people really grok how big seals are, but seals can get quite large, like elephant seals, which I don't believe live here, but but holy moly, they're enormous. Or leopard seals. They're quite large too. But what about freshwater, right? Because we are talking about lakes. Loch Ness is a lake. Okanagan Lake is a lake. What's the biggest creature that could live in such a place or near a river? I'm testing your knowledge of the local flora and fauna. Yeah, sturgeons are pretty big. Where I'm from, up in North Bay, I'm back in Ottawa now, but up in North Bay, we have lake sturgeon. And lake sturgeon can grow to be probably about as big as I am. That's a pretty big fish. But you don't really see fish any larger than that. There are other kinds of sturgeon that can be even larger. Um, like the white sturgeon, which lives out in on the west coast, and it goes back and forth between the sea and the river, kind of like a salmon. And those could be quite large, very big. Yeah, pike, muskie, and gar, and they're big, but they're not sea monster big, right? Will, how big would you say those fish can get? I don't know the exact number, but I know they don't quite top out sturgeon. I know that muskie are a little bit bigger than pike, or can be a little bit bigger than pike. In the United States, there are some kinds of gar that get very big, like the alligator gar can get very, very big. Yeah, 50 centimeters. Um, so are you sure 50? That's only half a meter. But then again, I'm rusty when it comes to my fish knowledge. There's one creature that lives near rivers on the west coast that can get very, very big. But it doesn't live in the river. It lives near the rivers. Oh, 50 inches. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's pretty big. That's big. That's like what? That's like over 5 feet, isn't it? What's 12 divided by 50? I'm bad at math. But that's big. Yeah, that's pretty big fish. But that's like as big as they get. Okay. One last guess. Really big creature, lives near rivers. Think West Coast. Bears. Yes, bears. Grizzly bears. They get real big. In the fall, who likes to follow Fat Bear Week when they do that on social media? They have the Fat Bear Week. The national parks people do it, where they post pictures of bears that are getting really fat because they're loading up on salmon during the salmon run to get ready for winter. You've never heard of Fat Bear Week? You are in for a treat, Martha. Yeah, that's true. Black bears are not super big. Black bears are the kinds of bears we have in Ontario, for example. And I was always taught because I grew up in the country, right? If you see a black bear, don't run away. But try and make yourself look large and make a lot of noise, and they'll leave you alone. Grizzly bear, not so much. Grizzly bear, I think you want to slowly and quietly back away from. And polar bears are gigantic death machines. I love them, but I wouldn't want to meet one. Um, but yeah, these fat bears that load up on all this salmon, they're eating like 20,000 calories a day, and they're fattening up for winter, and they can only do that during the salmon run, right? And those are big bears, right? Polar bears are huge, but they live in the sea, so they've got to go hunting seals and stuff out on the sea ice. So you can only get so big in terrestrial, like in freshwater, uh, in freshwater environments. Oh yeah, moose are huge. I mean, yeah, yeah. I think that sums it up, Kyla or Kaya. Yeah, I would not want to cross paths with a polar bear. They're just so hydrodynamic and powerful, like truly powerful creatures. Um, yeah. Moose. Yeah, that's a good one, Zach. Moose. So, have you ever seen a moose in real life? Anybody? They're enormous. Pictures don't really do them justice. They're huge. They're absolutely enormous. And it's true, they do eat a lot of plants. They're vegetarians. They're herbivorous. Yeah, they're enormous. Enormous. Like big horses. Like big draft, they're like draft horse size. They're so big. Um, oh, ever cool. Yeah. So, that's kind of the takeaway is that if you're going to posit the existence of some creature that, some kind of enormous sea serpent sort of creature, I mean, well, that's an interesting claim, but can the ecosystem that you claim to have spotted it in actually support, such a creature? That's a question you have to consider. As in good night, you're dead? What? Oh, yes. Yes. What the polar bear. Yes. Good night. You're dead. I have a friend from Cochrane. He's originally from Cochrane, which is way up in northern Ontario, kind of close to like James Bay and Hudson's Bay. And they would have bear warnings. So like if the kids are out at recess, they'd be like, "Oh, somebody's seen a bear around town. It's a polar bear." And so then they bring all the kids inside because they're just so big. And with climate change, um, there's less sea ice. So it makes it more difficult for the bears to go hunting seals on the ice, like in the Arctic Circle or in James Bay. So you also get polar bears in northern, like far northern Ontario and northern Quebec because they live around Hudson's Bay. So that's actually quite far south if you think about it. Um, but because of climate change, there's not as much sea ice, and so bears are having to find alternative food sources. And unfortunately, that means that they are coming into contact with humans a lot more, right? Searching through garbage and so forth, right? Um, so Ogopogo, like I said, is kind of domestically famous, but not nearly as famous as the most famous Canadian cryptid, which is, of course, Sasquatch, or as he's known around the world, Bigfoot. So we're all probably familiar with Bigfoot, maybe from shows like Finding Bigfoot. Look at this. Look at Bobo with his evidence bag. I love this picture so much because, like, I don't know. I don't know offhand how long the show had been on the air. It was quite a long time. They never found him, right? They never found Bigfoot. But anyway, what they were looking for is a large bipedal ape, and he lives in North America. He does have counterparts from around the world, right? In Eurasia, we have the Yeti or the abominable snowman. Oh, here it is. So 2011 to 2018. So 7 years and then a special in 2021. And you can watch this clip if you want to. Although I'm sure you've all seen the show. Who has seen the show, actually? I've seen clips of it, but has anyone ever taken a gander at Finding Bigfoot? Well, it's certainly entertaining. I don't know all of their names. I only know Bobo's name. This is Bobo because Bobo is just such an interesting character. You know, he's got this kind of interesting cadence to his voice, you know, so like, oh wow, can't wait to go out looking for squatches, you know, like he just has this very interesting way of speaking. He's a very entertaining character. Um, this woman is the skeptic of the team. Spoiler alert, she's not really that skeptical. She just kind of goes along and, yep, uh-huh, uh-huh, and kind of smiles and nods with everything. And these other two, I don't know their names. They're not as memorable as Bobo. But that's the idea, you know. They go out looking for Bigfoot all around North America. Often they'll go out with, you know, night vision cameras. Uh, they'll make calls. Um, try and investigate if anybody has any kind of photo or video evidence. They'll go and take a look. A lot of testimonial evidence, so people just saying that they've seen something. Right? It's entertainment. It's entertainment. It's not a serious scientific enterprise. It's just entertainment. Um, but I think whether you've seen this show or not, you've got some idea of what Bigfoot or Sasquatch is supposed to be, right? Large bipedal ape, as we've already said. Also highly intelligent. Supposed to be well, if Sasquatch is an ape, then we should expect a Sasquatch to be highly intelligent, because apes are highly intelligent. Doesn't like people. Said to make distinctive noises, kind of like screams or calls. You see this on the show. They'll do calls where they're in the forest at night and they just go like, "Ah!" and scream really loudly and see if they can get a reply from Bigfoot. Sometimes it's also claimed that Bigfoot knocks on trees, so makes a weird kind of knocking noise. Recently, this is not something we find in the original Bigfoot reports, but something that's emerged within the last little while is this idea that Bigfoot has a very distinct smell, a very smelly smell, like worse than a skunk, right? So Bigfoot is supposed to smell very bad. That's the modern picture of Bigfoot. Anything else we can add to that? Am I missing anything about Bigfoot? What do we think? You know, one thing I think is curious is I don't really see a lot of claims of Bigfoot using tools, which I think is somewhat remarkable. But um, I don't know. Maybe one of you has heard of a claim of that nature or something similar. Well, I've got a question. Has anyone ever seen Bigfoot or saw something that they thought could possibly be Bigfoot? No. Never? Yeah. Quan never has. Zach. Unfortunately, does not count. It has to be alive. Actually, one of the things that where we're gonna end up today is that in order to establish that Bigfoot actually exists, we would need a type specimen. So an example of the species. So we would need a real version of your plushie. We would need a real like specimen of Bigfoot to conclusively settle this question of whether or not Bigfoot exists. I'll tell you what, my mom and her partner are avid outdoors persons. They go off into the woods on weekends and in the summers, a lot of fishing. In the fall, a little bit of hunting. And they do this all the time, every year. And neither of them has ever seen a Sasquatch. They have seen some very cool creatures. Um, in fact, some big cats. Big cats. My mom claims to have seen lots of different kinds of big cats, even on their property. I haven't verified this myself. I want to verify. I actually do want to verify this because this is quite interesting. But they claim to have seen cougar tracks. Now, keep in mind, this is on Ontario, where the cougar has been more or less wiped out. But there are actually sightings of cougars in Ontario, north and south. Um, it's unclear, and an interesting actual zoological question, right? It's unclear whether these cougars that are being seen are are the eastern population bouncing back from near extinction, or whether they're cougars from the west who are coming in and taking over the territory. We don't know, but there are cougar sightings. It does appear that the cougar is making a comeback in Ontario. Um, and again, my mom claims to have seen evidence in the form of tracks in the snow on their property, which is plausible. But I would like to verify this with like trail cam footage or a cast of a footprint. Yeah, I think I didn't see that video, Will, but I saw it come up on my feed and I've been meaning to watch it. What I think is happening there is that we're getting a melanated version of a cougar. So Black Panthers are not actually a species of cat. They're melanated versions of like leopards and what's the other one? Leopards and jaguars. So what we probably have are just black cougars. Kind of like, you know, those squirrels, the gray squirrel. I have some gray squirrels living in my trees out front. And there's a mother. There's a mother squirrel who's gray, but every time she has a litter, they're all black. But they're the same species of squirrel. I think something like that is going on with these Black Panther sightings. I think that they are the melanated variety of cougar. That means they have more melanin, so they have a darker coat, right? That's a good idea, Kaya. That gift would give back to me too, because maybe I could catch footage of a cougar which would be really cool. So all this is to say is like, look, I don't know if there's cougars in Ontario for sure, but it certainly seems plausible, right? And you know, maybe my mom's a testimony like, oh, I saw a cougar footprint. Like, yeah, sure you did. Would be a little bit, we should maybe doubt that claim a little bit uh, in absence of any other evidence, except that we do have evidence of cougars making a comeback in Ontario, right? Now, here's where I'm going with this, right? People claim to have uh, footprints of Bigfoot, of Bigfoot fur, right? Sometimes even whole specimens of Bigfoot. Um, uh, but nobody's produced a type specimen. Nobody's ever gotten conclusive video evidence of Bigfoot. And until we do, everything else is just kind of, like we don't know. But yeah, good idea, Kaya. I'm gonna get a trail cam for my mom for Christmas. And maybe, she's not gonna see Bigfoot, but maybe we'll catch a glimpse of some large felines. So, how did this myth of Bigfoot come about? If it is a myth, which I strongly suspect it is. Well, as Loxton and Prothero write, fantastic tales of humanoid monsters, ogres, and wild men were common in almost all cultures for thousands of years before the emergence of a canonical portrait of Bigfoot. It is natural that giant lore should be a universal feature of human storytelling. After all, giants are the easiest monsters to imagine. Bigger, stronger, wilder versions of ourselves. And there are many stories recounted by Loxton and Prothero, many accounts of large supernatural humanoids that we can find in indigenous folklore. Did Bigfoot or Sasquatch originate from there? Well, maybe. It's interesting to me, giant lore. Um, I think they're right about this, right? All cultures seem to have some version of the giant, right? The what I'm most familiar with is obviously European folklore, which certainly has stories of giants, whether it's children's stories like Jack and the Beanstalk, or if you're going back to, old stories like, well, Grendel from Beowulf is kind of gigantic, right? Um, and of course, other traditions too, like Goliath from the Bible, right? David fights Goliath. Goliath is, well, huge. He's so big that now we call really, really big things Goliath, right? So the name Goliath is sort of synonymous with being gigantic. But outside of that, I'm not too familiar. What about maybe somebody wants to share some giant lore from their own background? So if you're from a background with giant lore, please share. Suppose we can't forget about the original giants, the giants from ancient Greece, right? In ancient Greek myth, the giants are created when the Olympians overthrow the Titans, right? And their blood mixes with the ocean and makes giants. And there are other large creatures in those myths too, like the Cyclops, the Hundred Handers, right? These are also very large creatures. Python, Typhon, these are kind of like big giant sea monsters, like a kaiju, right? Speaking of kaiju, I guess Godzilla technically counts as a giant because he is pretty big. Anything else? Or am I just going to rattle off more giants as they come to me? Well, we can move on. Um, where did Sasquatch originate? Oh, here's some. What's here? Um, oh, interesting. Was Antaeus a giant, Lena? It's interesting because yeah, Morocco is kind of close to the what we call now. What is it we call now? The Straits of Gibraltar, right? Um, which the Greeks were also familiar with. The Greeks were familiar with the whole of the Mediterranean. They used to call the Straits of Gibraltar the Pillars of Hercules, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he moved big rocks, so I assume yes. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. An interesting little bit of giant lore is that I like is from like the Old Norse stuff because I'm a bit of an Old Norse nerd, but not all giants were giant, right? Like the word Jotun is translated as giant, which I think maybe is because scholars had tried to Hellenize a lot of that Germanic stuff, make it sound more like the Greeks, um, where the giants were giant. But no, but in that tradition, giant doesn't necessarily mean big. It's just a translation of Jotun, which means like a bad supernatural being, like, like the opposite of a god. I think there's an Old Norse scholar I follow on YouTube, Dr. Jackson Crawford, who explains the word Jotun maybe better means maybe it's better translated as like anti-god because they're like the enemies of the Aesir, right? But giant doesn't necessarily mean giant in that tradition. But otherwise, most giants are pretty big. So maybe Antaeus was really big, and that's how he was able to move all those rocks, right? Tainbo Kulang for class, and there was a giant king. Ooh, interesting. Where does that originate from? Where's that story come from, Leo? Oh, Irish. Okay. That's cool. A giant king. I wonder if he became king because he was a giant, or if he became a giant after becoming king. Suppose it could have gone either way. I haven't read this story. I know nothing about this story, but maybe I'll have to check it out. All right, so how did Bigfoot come about? Where did he originate from? Well, Loxton and Prothero tell us in the 1920s in British Columbia's lush Fraser Valley, a man named John W. Burns collected the original eyewitness reports of encounters with Sasquatch. All of modern Bigfoot mythology grew from this regional seed, spreading across the North American continent and beyond, mutating and hybridizing with later reports, hoaxes, and popular fiction. But the original Sasquatch were not big giant apes. They were big giant people. They were like big giant indigenous people, according to according to Burns. As John Green explains, not John Green from, not the author and YouTuber, but the Bigfooter John Green explains the Sasquatch with which Mr. Burns' readers were familiar were basically giant Indians. Now, I know we don't use this term anymore, but this is just how. I mean, these are by American. This book is by American authors, where I think Indian is still the term that's used. In Canada, we say Indigenous or First Nations. So, um, basically, they're big, giant Indigenous people that live out in remote locations. Although avoiding civilization, they had clothes, fire, weapons, and the like, and lived in villages. They were called hairy giants, it is true, but this was taken to mean that they had long hair on their heads, something along the lines of today's hippies. So these big, giant, hairy people weren't hairy in the sense that they had hair all over their bodies. They were hairy in the sense that they just had long hair, right? Now, John Burns, even claimed to have quoted one of the locals. Now, this is very cringe. Who read this, by the way, and what was your reaction when you read this part of the chapter? I'm curious. I want to know your reactions. If not, I'll read it to you. Um, oh my God. To all who now hear, I, Chief Flying Eagle, say, some white men have seen Sasquatch. Many Indians have seen Sasquatch and spoke to them. Sasquatch still live all around here. Like, that sounds like something out of a badly written Western movie. You know? What was your reaction? Yeah, right? It's pretty bad. Like, yes, yes. I mean, yeah. Now, here's the thing. Burns was a school teacher and also what used to be called an Indian agent. So, um, it used to be the case, that if you were, again, this is the legal term, but a status Indian. So an indigenous person who had status as a First Nations individual, you couldn't just leave your reservation. You had to get permission to do that. It's not like that anymore, thank goodness. But there used to be these liaisons called Indian agents between the government and the First Nations communities that would make sure that nobody did anything that they weren't supposed to, even though a lot of the things they weren't supposed to do were arguably unjust. I think Burns is working at a time where things were not as good as they are now, but not as bad as they once were. Um, and it's also not clear whether Burns is having a trick played on him or whether he's in on the joke, right? It could be that these people that actually they were members of the Chehalis people. It could have been that it could have been that they were screwing with Burns. They were like, "Look at this Indian agent guy. Get a load of this guy. Hey, Burns, we saw Sasquatch again, right?" And this guy Burns, "What? Are you for real, Sasquatch? Wow!" Like they could have just been playing a joke on this guy. Yeah, exactly, Leo. Like, really, Chief Flying Eagle? Like indigenous people, like, okay, so their names are not exactly like that, right? There are certainly indigenous names which, when translated into English, feature animals. Um, but Chief Flying Eagle sounds like someone's playing a trick on someone, right? Maybe it was Burns that was in on it. Yeah, the original Peter Pan. Oh, that movie, man. Oh boy, that whole part with the Indians. Yeah, that hasn't aged well. But it's true. Like it sounds like a caricature to me, right? I'm not indigenous. I don't speak an indigenous language. Um, but I am from North Bay, where we're right close to the Nipissing First Nation, and there's a lot of a lot of names for different locations up there are still they're in I believe it's Ojibwe. Ojibwe is spoken up there. Um, and it's just I've never seen anything like this. So I don't know. Yeah, wild goose chase or a wild flying eagle chase. So yeah, we don't know if the community was playing a joke on Burns or if Burns was in on the joke. But this is how Tales of Sasquatch got going. But you've got to keep in mind, we're not talking about the Sasquatch that we know today, a big giant hairy ape. We're talking about basically giant indigenous people. So imagine just indigenous people out there doing their thing, but much bigger than you or I. And then something interesting happened. In 1957, the authors tell us, the provincial government made funding available for projects celebrating the centennial of British Columbia. The town of Harrison Hot Springs would qualify for $600 of that funding if it could propose a suitable project. The village council brainstormed and settled on a scheme to dust off and exploit a largely forgotten local legend. Why not fund a Sasquatch hunt? So let's get tourists in here to look for Sasquatch. Now, the proposal never got funded, but the idea went viral. Like this was an idea that went viral like pre-internet. Newspapers picked it up, ran stories about it, and it went all across Canadian newspapers. The story spread as far as Sweden in Europe and New Zealand down in the southern hemisphere. And the British Columbia Centennial Committee, even though they didn't fund the hunt, offered a reward of $5,000 to anybody who could produce a Sasquatch specimen. They probably offered that sum because they knew nobody was going to be able to do it. Um, but remember that the idea was not actually to find a Sasquatch. The idea was to increase tourism to Harrison Hot Springs, which is still a Bigfoot hotspot, by the way. If you go there, I haven't been, but I was looking through pictures online while I was prepping for this lecture, and they lean into the Bigfoot lore. You know, there's wooden statues of Sasquatch all over the place. So this Sasquatch hunt attracted a lot of people. People from Canada, people from Europe, like Rene Dahinden from Switzerland. He went on to become quite a famous Bigfoot investigator. John Burns came out and spoke to the press about the Sasquatch. Again, these are not the ape version of Sasquatch, but the giant human version of Sasquatch. Hoaxers came out too. There was one expedition that set out from Lillooet. They were actually caught with these giant wooden feet because they had intended to make some Sasquatch tracks. And that's kind of how it stayed for a bit until a series of alleged sightings changed the public image of the Sasquatch. And these sightings were recounted by William Rowe. He claimed to have encountered a Sasquatch while hiking. He said, "My first impression was of a huge man, about 6 feet tall, almost 3 feet wide, and probably weighing somewhere near 300 pounds. It was covered from head to foot with dark brown silver-tipped hair, but as it came closer, I saw by its breasts that it was a female. Its arms were much thicker than a man's arms and longer, reaching almost to its knees. Its feet were broader proportionally than a man's, about 5 inches wide at the front and tapering to much thinner heels. When it walked, it placed the heel of its foot down first, and I could see the gray-brown skin or hide on the soles of its feet. The head was higher at the back than at the front. The nose was broad and flat. The lips and chin protruded further than its nose. But the hair that covered it, leaving bare only the parts of its face, around its mouth, nose, and ears, made it resemble an animal as much as a human. None of this hair, even on the back of its head, was longer than an inch, and its neck was also inhuman, thicker and shorter than any man's I had ever seen. That's a lot closer to our contemporary picture of Bigfoot, right? Like if I say to you, imagine Bigfoot or imagine Sasquatch, you probably think of something like that description, as opposed to something like Burns's description of, just a big giant indigenous person, right? In fact, this description from William Rowe kind of reminds me of the Beast Titan. Anybody see Attack on Titan? I just whenever I see the Beast Titan, I think of William Rowe's description of Bigfoot. Oh man, has no one seen Attack on Titan? Okay, good. Thank goodness. Yeah, the Beast Titan. Basically Sasquatch. I mean, the more recent version, not the original version of Sasquatch. Yeah, you're right, Fern. They fumbled it. Well, not they. The ending. Yeah, I agree. I think everything up until the ending was pretty solid. I think the first and second seasons are still my favorite. But yeah, I hate when a really good show fumbles the ending. Um, so the authors say here, to a profound extent, Bigfoot lore stands or falls on Roe. If true, Roe's story remains among the most detailed and informative close-range sightings of an undiscovered primate. If Roe invented his creature, however, then a very dark shadow falls over all the reports that parrot his description, which is to say, most of the cases in the Bigfoot database. And here's the other interesting thing about Roe. Um, we don't know a whole lot about him. No other cryptozoologists seem to have met him before he died. So he's kind of a mysterious figure. We don't know a lot about him. But here's what the authors are claiming. If Roe made it up, we have to discount all the other Bigfoot stuff post Roe. Think again of finding Bigfoot. What kind of creature are they looking for? Again, a tall bipedal ape that's hairy, that might smell bad, might make weird noises, knock on trees, and so forth. Um, okay, yeah. But that echoes Roe's description of Bigfoot. And if Roe was making it up, that kind of pulls the rug out from under all of the subsequent Bigfoot stuff, whether it's claims of tracks or of finding fur or even a whole specimen. Certainly discounts sightings. So, if Roe was a bullshitter, uh, then that does not bode well for the cryptozoologists who are out there trying to find a creature that looks like the creature that Roe described. But here's another watershed moment in Bigfoot lore. For all the press, the authors write that the Harrison Hot Springs Sasquatch hunt received in 1957, the legend retained a quaint Canadian flavor until the following year. In 1958, in the region surrounding Bluff Creek, California, so quite a bit further south, the Sasquatch, rebranded Bigfoot, became a breakout American hit. Like so many Canadian recording artists. Can't get arrested in Canada. You've got to go down to the United States to make it big, right? Um, it all began with this fellow, Raymond Wallace. He was a construction worker. He worked in road construction, and he began making fake tracks near his work site. And this is a cast of one of the tracks. He would periodically do this for the rest of his life. He was a hoaxer. We know he was a hoaxer. Now, it was Jerry Crew. Oh, actually, sorry, this is Jerry Crew pictured here, who made plaster casts out of the tracks that Wallace had made. How do we know Wallace was a hoaxer? Well, after his death, his family revealed a set of the wooden feet that he had been using. Here they are. Now, we don't have the original fake feet. They haven't been produced, but we do have an alternative set that we know he used. And he was a well-known prankster, this Wallace fellow. Once he even claimed to have captured a Bigfoot only to release it while he was negotiating the sale of the specimen with other Bigfoot researchers. I think he also claimed that he liked breakfast cereal of some kind. Like, oh, Bigfoot really likes his Frosted Flakes. That's what I've been feeding him. Yeah, a troll. There are still Bigfoot trolls. Um, who has seen, let me find you what this is called. Peter Kane dog training on YouTube. Don't it's not safe for work. Okay, I'll just tell you that. And I'm not going to share it with you in class. Yeah, Will, like he's obviously trolling, but he does it pretty well. Where you find yourself wondering like, wait, does he really believe what he's saying? Like, I think there are little clues where you can pick up like, no, he's obviously trolling. But oh my God. It's some of it is funny. Um, anyway, go look that up on your own time. I'm not going to share any of the videos in class because they're absolutely not safe for work. But when I watch Peter Kane dog training talk about his Sasquatch encounters, it reminds me of this Wallace fellow. Um, Another interesting thing is that other Bigfoot researchers failed to mention Wallace's role in the Bluff Creek case. That is an omission, right? That's kind of an omission, which is not something you want to do if you're trying to conduct an intellectually honest investigation of something, right? I mean, these guys will talk about the Bluff Creek tracks like, oh, who made the Bluff Creek tracks? Whatever could have caused this. It must have been Sasquatch, without mentioning the fact that, it's pretty much established that Wallace is a hoaxer, right? So they're leaving that out. and that's not a good move. Um, so what can we conclude about the Bluff Creek tracks? Well, the authors conclude that if cryptozoology is to achieve its scientific aspirations, it cannot afford to be precious about even its own bedrock cases or to be unduly deferential to figures respected in the cryptozoological subculture. Right? Just because Wallace is just because he found these tracks, we can't ignore the evidence that he created the tracks. At the very least, the authors continue, we must acknowledge that the footprints cast by Jerry Crew and the other Bluff Creek tracks are contaminated by their close association with a habitual hoaxer and must be quarantined from the database of Bigfoot evidence. Then we get to this, the Patterson Gimlin film. Maybe we'll talk before we talk about this, we should have a break. What do you think? All right. Let's have a break. Let's do 15 minutes. So let's come back at 4 or 1 after 4 and we'll continue. I think oh yeah, we're more than halfway through. We should be able to finish on time. Okay, see you all in 15. All right, everybody. It's about time we get started again. So let's share the screen and get back to the slides. Right, I left off right before discussing the Patterson Gimlin film, which, if you've seen any footage of what is alleged to be Bigfoot, chances are it is this film. This is an iconic film. This is a still from that film, which was taken by Roger Patterson and Bob Giblin. So these were two cowboys, real cowboys, people who ride horses and do ranching and all of that cowboy stuff. They went out to Bluff Creek where Wallace had faked his tracks with a little camcorder, a handheld camcorder, intending to capture footage of a living Bigfoot. And they, as the authors say, promptly did. So this has become to be known as the Patterson Gimlin film. You can watch the full clip here. This is taken from a National Geographic special, and National Geographic has uploaded the clip to YouTube. So check it out. Here is what the authors say. I'm going to say something that will be unpopular on both sides of the debate, both pro Bigfooters and skeptics. No one knows whether the film depicts a real Sasquatch or a man in a gorilla suit. We don't know. We can't say for certain it's not Bigfoot in that film. We cannot say that with full certainty. We don't know. Why? To know for certain, we would need a type specimen, so an actual specimen of Bigfoot that we could compare to the footage in the film. A confession, maybe that Patterson and Gimlin had brought a friend with them and dressed him up in a gorilla suit and had him walk like that. Or some other piece of evidence that disproves the film, like the gorilla suit in question. We would need something like one of these bits of evidence in order to know for certain whether what we're seeing in that film is an actual Sasquatch or a human dressed up as one. Skeptics don't like that because they say, oh, well, of course it's a person in a gorilla suit. That's the simplest explanation. And Bigfooters don't like it because, look at the film. It's obviously Bigfoot, right? But this film, it's been debated not just by Bigfooters and other cryptozoologists, but also by anthropologists of all people, right? Um, but luckily, to quote the authors, circumstantial factors may cast light on the plausibility of the case. Roger Patterson, Roger Patterson's character, the serendipitous circumstances of the filming, hearsay testimony that the film was a hoax, and the apparently derivative structure of Patterson's narrative and the money that Patterson earned from the film. So these are all circumstances that cast doubt on the film. Indeed, Patterson had the means and motive to create a hoax. That doesn't mean he definitely did a hoax, but he did have the means and the motive. He had the money, the time, and he made a lot of money off of this film. Indeed, he's described in the book kind of like a used car salesman. Um, he would actually have screenings of the film and charge people money to come and see. A bit like we mentioned when we were talking about astrology, we talked about the Barnum effect or the Forer effect, named after P.T. Barnum, Phineas Taylor Barnum. Who can tell me a little about Barnum? You'll see where I'm going with this in a moment. But P.T. Barnum, what do we know about him? Well, if you don't know much, that's understandable. Um, he has been dead for a while. Yep. Barnum and Bailey Circus. Well, the Barnum effect, Kaya, is when those broad statements that could apply to anyone are taken to apply specifically to oneself. So, like the fortunes in a fortune cookie, right? You think maybe, oh, that's me, all right, but really it's so broad it could refer to anyone because Barnum and Bailey's circus had something for everyone, right? But you're right. Barnum and Bailey together ran a circus. Um, P.T. Barnum also had a sort of house of curiosities with which were mostly hoaxes, mermaid skeletons and these sorts of things, right? And Barnum himself was not out to fool people. He wasn't a hoaxer, but he wanted people to come in and see something interesting. He's also famous for saying there is a sucker born every minute. And Patterson kind of reminds me a little bit of Barnum, a showman, a salesman, a charismatic individual who's going to give you a fun experience, right? And he made a lot of money from these screenings of this film, which is interesting to me, right? So that's why I mentioned Barnum. P.T. Barnum is also the subject of that film, The Greatest Showman, which I haven't actually seen. I just know that it's who's it? Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman, right? He plays P.T. Barnum. It's a musical, right? Um, I don't know. Has anyone seen it? Is it good? Should I watch it? I always found that, I mean, Hugh Jackman is a good singer, but I kind of find his vibrato a little bit annoying. Like, that's probably a kind of a shallow critique of Jackman. I mean, the guy's a Tony Award winner, but he just goes so hard on that vibrato. I don't know, man. Um, so Sarah says it's good. I mean, I guess I'll check it. Yeah, maybe I'll check it out. Oh, Zendaya's cool. She crushes it, whatever she does. Zac Efron, I'm a bit less familiar with. Yeah, maybe I'll check it out. They're all good actors. Um, so Patterson had the means and motive, and you've also, I don't mean to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but you've also got to ask, key bono, right? Who benefits? Well, Patterson did benefit quite a bit from financially from the film. And you've got to wonder why nowadays, when these things are as prolific as they are, no one has produced a good recording of Bigfoot. I'll tell you what I have seen. I've mentioned this previously, but with the rise of AI, of generative AI, my Facebook feed is full of slop, right? It's full of what they call AI slop, just terrible nonsensical AI generated nonsense that is only meant to go viral. For some reason, a lot of the AI slop on my Facebook feed seems to be of fantastic creatures, some kind of cryptid like Bigfoot. There were a few weeks, there were a few weeks where it was just all mermaids. It was all AI generated footage of people catching mermaids. I don't know why Facebook is showing me this. Aliens too. Um, so now, of course, that's a worry. If somebody claims I've got video footage of a cryptid, um, now we've got to ask ourselves, could that be a deep fake or an AI generated video, right? So it's like kind of like an extra thing that we need to worry about now. But one wonders why, when everyone's got a smartphone in their pocket, there aren't more high quality images and video of these things that are alleged to be Bigfoot or a Sasquatch. Well, I don't know about that. I do see your point, Fernando, but um but at the same time, like think about the Patterson Gimlin film. If that's a fake, and you have the time to get all the way out to Bluff Creek, you have to have the means to get a camera, which in the 1960s these things were not cheap, and you've got to have everything else. You've got to have the gorilla suit. Maybe you've even got to pay the gorilla suit actor for their time, right? But with I can just type it in. I can just type it in. Show me, generate a video of Bigfoot walking away into the forest, and it'll do it, right? It might not be good. I might have to do it a few times, but um yeah, you're right. The issue was always there. It's just now it's like so easy to fake, right? But yeah, no, the issue was always there. Fakery has always been a concern. You're absolutely right about that. I think the worry is just that the ease of fakery now, right? But let's go on to the next case. Ivan Marks and the Bossberg Cripplefoot tracks. Loxton and Prothero tell us that in 1969 in Bossberg, which was a dying mining town, now it's a ghost town, Bossberg was the new home of a Bigfoot hunter named Ivan Marks. In an extraordinary coincidence, Bigfoot tracks promptly turned up at Marks's local garbage dump in late November. Even more coincidentally, they were discovered by Marks himself. And here's an image of one of those tracks. You can see why it's called the Cripplefoot tracks, because the right foot, pictured here, is kind of bent a little bit, like Bigfoot has a deformity in his right foot. The authors continue, if the tracks at Bluff Creek, California made Bigfoot a household name, and the Patterson Gimlin film gave the creature its enduring public face, it was the Cripplefoot case in Bossburg, Washington, that seduced Bigfoot's highest credentialed scientific defenders. So now, Bigfoot is in the public imagination, and this case was the one that attracted the most, well, not just Bigfoot hunters, but also actual zoologists, anthropologists, etc. The find led to a kind of Sasquatch gold rush, the authors tell us. Everyone involved in the search for Bigfoot descended on Bossberg, armed with everything from tranquilizer guns to aircraft. This stampede reached a fever pitch when a hoaxer named Joe Metlow came forward with the claim to have a Sasquatch for sale. Oh, I think this is the fellow who claimed that Sasquatch liked cornflakes or frosted flakes or something. Well, we never caught him. I mean, Joe Metlow claimed to have caught him. And Marks continued to find tracks after this whole gold rush, this whole Sasquatch gold rush died down. And he even claimed to have recorded a film of Bigfoot. Bigfoot hunter Peter Byrne, on the other hand, he was skeptical. And he actually discovered that Marks had faked the footage. I like this, It's good. It's a good sign, I think, when not just the skeptics are able to show that there's been fakery, but when the cryptozoologists themselves show that there's been fakery. You see this actually in some of the psychical research and some of the parapsychological research we talked about earlier in the term. Most psychical researchers and most parapsychologists were, um, I guess we could characterize them as believers rather than skeptics. But there were some skeptical psychical investigators. There were some skeptical parapsychologists, and they were able to identify fakery, like especially in terms of, ghost photography and that sort of thing, and with the parlor magic of seances. But of course, Um, this is different. This is cryptozoology. Nonetheless, good for Peter Byrne for discovering this fakery, right? Because we don't need fakery. If something is real, why do we need to fake it? Again, bring it back to the psychics, the claims of psychics and mediums and so forth. If you are for real, why do you need to fake it sometimes? It just doesn't make sense. The simple answer is that you're probably just faking it all the time. And here it looks like Marx had faked his footage. In nearby Arden, there was another fellow, Ray Pickens, who was creating fake Bigfoot tracks. And he did so not to convince people that Bigfoot was real and living in the area, but to show that anyone could do so. So maybe some of you checked out the video I shared previously about how to fake a UFO. Those people were hoaxers, but they weren't hoaxers with the aim of convincing people that UFOs are real. Rather, they were trying to show how easily it could be faked. That's what Pickens was doing here, and he did it. He said, "Look, I found Bigfoot tracks." A lot of people were like, "Wow, Bigfoot tracks!" But surprise! I made the Bigfoot tracks. Look how easy it is to be fooled by fakery. Kind of feels nasty being tricked like that. Um, but on the other hand, um, it's probably a good idea for us to come to grips with how easy it is to fake these tracks. All you need are a big, are a couple of fake feet to strap on your boots, right? Where's this leave us? The authors ask. The bottom line is that the famous Cripplefoot trackways were discovered by a repeat Bigfoot hoaxer. This is a red flag so huge and glaring that the evidence from Bossberg should long ago have been set aside by all serious Bigfoot researchers. Bizarrely, the exact opposite has happened. Even knowing that Marx hoaxed Cripplefoot, related evidence at the time that he had found the tracks, some Bigfooters find it impossible to set aside what they view as the inherent believability of the Cripplefoot prints. So the evidence for Bigfoot or Sasquatch does not really look all that promising. And of course, we've got this problem of filtering the good evidence from the bad evidence. I think we can reasonably conclude that of all the evidence we've looked at today, it's very likely that it's fake. We know that the original story of Sasquatch was probably a joke. We don't exactly know whether it was the Chehalis people playing a joke on John Burns or whether Burns was in on the joke and they were all playing a joke on the wider community. It's not really clear, but we know that that's a joke. We know that the Bluff Creek tracks were faked. We know that the Cripplefoot tracks were faked. We know that the tracks in Arden were faked, right? We know. Um, the Patterson Gimlin film, it might have been faked. We can't say definitively that it is a hoax because we don't have a type specimen or conclusive evidence that it was a hoax. But then just keep in mind that the original Sasquatch was not a big hairy ape, but a big giant human. And so if that was Sasquatch or Bigfoot, then, again, it all kind of turns on William Rowe's account, which was the first one to describe Sasquatch, um, as more of a non-human primate than a human primate. So the problem is filtering good evidence from bad evidence, and it seems like a lot of the evidence that we do have is actually quite bad. Um, Another problem is eyewitness reliability, right? And I think a really good example of this you can find in a documentary film or documentary series called Sasquatch. I'm wondering, has anyone seen this? It's a documentary piece. It was on Hulu. I think you can watch it on Crave if you're in Canada. It's really not actually that much to do with Sasquatch, but it starts with this account of these people being brutally murdered by Sasquatch. And what it turns out happened was that these people were all involved in the illegal drug trade, and they were probably murdered with heavy machinery by a sort of drug lord type figure who had got them all. I don't know whether they were. I can't recall whether they were. I think they were using crystal methamphetamine, which obviously can make you very paranoid and can otherwise affect your cognitive abilities and your perception in adverse ways. And so somebody survives this murder and says it was Sasquatch, um, when in reality it was actually organized crime and murder. But it really highlights the reliability of eyewitness testimony or lack thereof. It's a fascinating series. I think it's only 3 episodes long. You should really go watch it if you have the opportunity. And I'll add to that that anecdotally speaking, right? You know, I've talked about this before. I was just up in North Bay recently for a visit with my folks and with my partner's folks. Um, so I'm from North America. I grew up in the country out there. Previously, I lived in Southern Ontario and up until about grade 10, and it's not as rugged down there, but I still spent a lot of time out in the fields as a sort of like little amateur naturalist. I remember one of my earliest memories was going out in the field with my mom. I must have been, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old. I was quite young, and there were these little burrows in the sand. Um, I didn't know what they were, and I was trying to figure out what they were. All of a sudden, this creature shoots across this puddle. Like, what on earth was that thing? That was the first time I'd ever seen a crayfish. And these crayfish burrow into the mud. And they were really cool. I like to a little kid seeing that for the first time. You're like, wow, what on earth is that thing? That's really neat. And ever since then, I've always been fascinated by these little tiny freshwater crustaceans. And I'd go looking for all kinds of things out there: frogs, insects, probably mostly insects. But then when we got up to Northern Ontario, the variety of insects to find wasn't as interesting. I remember when I was in Southern Ontario, I would catch all kinds of cool stuff. They even had a pet praying mantis for a while. That was really cool. I raised butterflies from caterpillars to see what they would turn into, right? Not so much of that up in the north, but that is when I did get into fishing. And of course, when you get into fishing, you hear fish stories, fish tales, big fish stories. People routinely exaggerate the size of fish they catch. It's just a thing people do, right? Like, oh, you should have seen the pike I caught. It was this big. You know what I mean? I say picks or it didn't happen. Even, my mom. Like, I'm not obviously I love my mom. She's great. But when they go up in the north and they see some stuff, and inevitably it gets exaggerated. Like I remember one time her partner said, "Oh, you should have seen the bald eagle we saw when we were fishing. Must have had a 10-foot wingspan." Okay, I mean they're impressive creatures, but they just don't get that big, right? So you see this bears, eagles, different kinds of fish. A lot of people will misremember and therefore exaggerate their size. Um, it's just something that happens, right? Worse, as the authors say, as we have discussed, eyewitness reports are variable and diverge often from the popular canonical Bigfoot. Some accounts feature Sasquatches with huge pointed ears, complex marking, markings or heights over 12 feet tall. Bigfoot is reported in many colors, at many sizes, with many diverging anatomies. In some reports, Bigfoot can speak human languages. And although this is systematically downplayed in the mainstream Bigfoot literature, it is very common for witnesses to claim that Bigfoot has paranormal features and abilities, such as eyes that literally glow, psychic powers, or flying saucer type vehicles. Has anyone seen that one episode of Ancient Aliens on Bigfoot? Where they do an episode on Bigfoot? It's wild. Because of course first of all, of course they do. Of course they say, is Bigfoot an alien? Does Bigfoot travel in a flying saucer? Well, you just have to ask yourself, could Bigfoot travel in a flying saucer? And the answer is yes. Of course not. Like, come on. I'm willing to entertain, for example, whether a particular sighting is legit, whether a particular set of footprints is legit, or even whether the Patterson-Gimlin film is legit. But if you start claiming that Bigfoot has psychic powers or that he travels in a flying saucer, I mean, come on. That is just like, look, extraordinary claims, right? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And that is just, I don't know what kind of evidence we would need to establish that claim. We would not only need a Bigfoot type specimen, we'd also need his flying saucer. Like, so I think it's best just to disregard those um, extremely suspicious claims. Another problem we face is that people are prone to making misidentification errors, right? I think a lot of people see something and they really see something and they really believe it's Bigfoot. But is what they saw really Bigfoot, right? You saw something. How do you know it wasn't a tree stump or a bear or even a person in a gorilla suit? These are all misidentification errors. Now, we've discussed the reasons why this takes place. You know, if you think back again to what we discussed with respect to Freud and Jentsch on the uncanny. I mean, Freud doesn't really offer an evolutionary explanation. I think Jentsch's explanation of the uncanny, though, is much more compatible with an evolutionary explanation, even though he doesn't put it in those terms. But I've tried to fill in the blanks, right? So, like I said before the break, we've got these brains that have evolved to detect animacy and mentation because those things are important. We need to know in our environment what is alive and what is not. And out of the things that are alive, we need to know, what do they want with us? Are they prey? Are they predators? Right? So our brains are so good at detecting animacy and at detecting minds that sometimes we detect them even when they're not there. And this can easily happen. If you're out in the forest, you see something that you think looks like Bigfoot, and you decide that's Bigfoot. But maybe what you saw was something else. Could have been anything from a tree stump to a bear, right? In fact, in this 2009 paper that the authors refer to that appeared in the Journal of Biogeography, this paper found, and I quote, that Sasquatch distribution is essentially identical to black bear distribution. The study says, although it is possible that Sasquatch and Ursus americanus share such remarkably similar bioclimatic requirements, we nonetheless suspect that many Bigfoot sightings are, in fact, of black bears. And yeah, I mean, the simplest answer is most likely the correct one. So if you see something in the bush that's hairy and tall, is it Sasquatch? Or is it more likely that it's a bear standing on its hind legs? Bears do stand up on their hind legs. They don't just stay on all fours. And sometimes they even walk for a little bit on their hind legs. If you didn't know what was going on, if you were in the forest and it was difficult to see, or maybe it was dark, you might mistake that for a Sasquatch. So, a lot of the tracks we've looked at today were definitively faked. But is it possible that some tracks could be due to Sasquatch? Maybe. But you also have to consider whether the appearance of something in the soil might be due to just pareidolia or wishful thinking. Um, Something that looks a bit like a track could be mistaken for a track that was made by an actual animal, when perhaps it has another cause. Maybe it's just part of the natural geography. Um, it's the same problem we keep coming back to. And this is the sort of central problem in Loxton and Prothero's chapter on Bigfoot. And that is that we need a type specimen. In order to really tell whether a set of tracks is real or not, we need an actual Sasquatch foot to compare the tracks to. And we don't have that. You might ask, well, what if we had other physical evidence? What if we had DNA, right? If we had Sasquatch DNA, that would settle it, wouldn't it? Well, maybe. This is what the authors say. For many considering Bigfoot for the first time, the solution seems obvious. Why not test Bigfoot's hair or DNA? Samples of possible Sasquatch hair, scat, and fluids have been collected fairly often. As it turns out, many promising samples have been analyzed by experts or even sequenced for DNA. To date, they have all been a bust. This is disappointing, but it is not the end of the bad news. It seems that testing hair would be unable to solve the mystery, even if Bigfooters were to discover samples of genuine Sasquatch hair. It is the same type specimen problem that plagues footprint evidence and eyewitness reports. No one has any idea what Sasquatch hair would look like. We need the type specimen because if you know, I could show up at a lab and say I've got this bag full of Sasquatch hair that I found in the forest, and they can test it, and maybe it comes up, inconclusive, like, oh, we don't know where this came from, but it's not from any animal we know. Okay, fine. How do I know it's Bigfoot? We still need the type specimen because we need to. That's where we would get the DNA from to compare it to, right? Oh, and I forgot to mention, I guess I should. What do I mean by type specimen? I mean like an example of the species. You go to a museum, maybe you get to go into the basement, and they've got lots of animals preserved in jars. Type specimens are a bit like that. When Europeans sailed to Australia, for example, they had never seen some of the strange creatures that live there. So the Europeans had never encountered creatures like the duck-billed platypus or the echidna. Or think of Darwin when he's sailing around going to the Galapagos and he's discovering all kinds of interesting creatures like giant tortoises and marine iguanas. Well, he brought specimens back to England to show the other naturalists of the day, right? Like, so in the Galapagos, I found this tortoise, and then he's brought the tortoise back to him. In fact, I think there are tortoises that are still alive that were brought back by Darwin's expedition on the Beagle, because tortoises live for that long. So there are tortoises living in zoos in England that are that old, which is amazing, right? Um, or like when Europeans went to Australia, um, they brought back type specimens of things like echidnas and duck-billed platypuses. The people at home thought they were fakes, right? They were like, "No, you're playing a trick on us. You've taken some kind of beaver and sewn a bird's beak onto it." No, no, they were real. And by examining the type specimens, those European naturalists could determine that, oh no, these are actually real creatures, right? Of course, the indigenous people of Australia, they had seen those things, no big deal. They knew it was real. But those credulous European explorers were like, a duck-billed platypus, now you're really pulling my leg, right? So, but that's what you would need to do. Same with the coelacanth, right? We thought it was extinct until we caught one. That's a type specimen. We need one of these. for Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Until we have one, we're kind of stuck. Believers will continue to believe, and skeptics will remain skeptical. We need a type specimen to settle the question of whether Bigfoot exists. Of course, the biggest problem we face is hoaxing, right? Um, Pranks and hoaxes explain most of what we've looked at today. And they also contaminate our data set. It's kind of like the authors say here, the two great cliches ruling the Bigfoot literature are the mountain of evidence and the connected argument where there's smoke, there's fire. Well, there's not really a mountain of evidence once you filter out all the bad evidence. When you filter out all the bad evidence, we really don't have very much evidence at all. And I would argue that that doesn't just go for Sasquatch, Bigfoot, but also for, the Ogopogo, also for the Loch Ness Monster, and for other cryptids as well. The Loch Ness Monster is kind of like a singular cryptid, right? There's just one, or maybe a small group of them. But then you have other cryptids like Sasquatch, or maybe something like the Chupacabra, um, which are a species. They're claimed to be a species of some sort, right? But in any case, when you filter out the bad evidence from the good evidence, and you take into account, the principles of natural science, so falsifiability, the principle of parsimony, um, making sure you're looking for the right kinds of evidence and not discounting counter evidence, there really isn't a mountain of evidence. And of course, to continue, this is a non sequitur. Where there's smoke, there's smoke. And in this case, that smoke is so widespread that it actually argues against the existence of Bigfoot. So if you're a Bigfoot believer, I don't want to rain on your parade. Um, but it's not likely that such a creature exists. Back to finding Bigfoot. Why do people believe in Bigfoot? Why does a show like this enjoy the popularity that it does? Right? It was on Animal Planet, I believe, for 7 seasons. Clips of it are on YouTube. They get lots of views. What's the appeal? Well, to connect back with some of what Jensch and Freud have to say about the uncanny, they're right in that there is something frightening about the unknown and the unfamiliar. But a related emotion to fright is thrill, right? The unknown can be thrilling, exhilarating. When you encounter something new or something that you can't quite explain, that can be very thrilling. And I think that explains the appeal of not just Bigfoot in general, but of specific shows or specific efforts to find Bigfoot. So finding Bigfoot is popular because the unknown, while sometimes frightening, is also fascinating. And people want to believe that there's more out there than we know about, which there almost certainly is. I just don't know whether Bigfoot is amongst those things. As I said, if you haven't seen the show, I don't want to ruin it for you, but they actually never find Bigfoot. And what I mean is they don't get a type specimen. They never find a type specimen. It's predominantly testimony, um, maybe the odd thing which looks like a footprint. Um, I think I also have concerns of fakery, because these guys will go out into the woods and make their calls, right? Like, "Oh," that's my impression of a Sasquatch, I guess. And then you might hear a call being returned to you. That could just be a crew member doing that, right? We don't know. We don't know if they're faking it or not. Let's say they're not faking it. You hear something weird in the forest. Maybe you're going to go try to look for Bigfoot. So you go into the forest and you go camping for a bit. And you hear a strange noise. Do you think you would be able to identify what kind of animal that is based on just its noise? Honestly, geez, there's only 18 people here. Oh, what a bummer, man. We've got like, there's 100 people. I wish more people would participate in the live lectures. Martha says no. Thank you, Martha. Will, yes. Animals do not sound like you think they do. Yeah, animals make very different sounds. Yeah. Yeah, even chickens. Yeah. Yeah, like cougars screaming. Who's heard a fox? Because back home, I'd sometimes hear foxes at night, and they just sound like children being murdered. Like like it's an awful sound. It's like a blood-curdling scream. Um, how about a sandhill crane? You guys ever hear a sandhill crane? They sound kind of like dinosaurs. Yeah, Kaya, you're right. When you hear a bald eagle in a movie, what you are actually hearing is a red-tailed hawk. Why? Well, because bald eagles actually don't sound very terrifying at all. They sound cute. They sound very cute. Just cute little murder birds. But yeah, the shoebill, they do that weird like they're huge, man. And peacocks too. I know I've heard a peacock before because I went to the Toronto Zoo and they had all the peacocks just walking around and I know I heard them, but I can't quite remember what they sound like. But yeah, if you hear an animal in the woods, unless you're a seasoned like hunting or fishing guide or an amateur naturalist or you're like a biologist or a zoologist who studies particular animals, you're not you don't know what you're hearing, right? Some of the noises these guys make on their show actually sound to me quite a lot like deer and elk, right? The screams they make just kind of remind me of the sound an elk makes, you know? But that's the problem. Like, bottom line, whether they're faking it or not, they need a type specimen. Yeah, whales. Whales are quite cool. Is your friend freaked out by them? Yeah. Wow. I think they sound quite cool. But I did have a friend once who was like disgusted by whales. Like we were talking about whales. Oh, Kaya too. Yeah. See, this friend of ours, I remember my partner and I were hanging out and we were just talking about how majestic we thought whales are. And our friend was like, "Ugh. No, they're all like, all wet and gross and covered in barnacles. Like, ugh." Like she was actually having a disgust response to these whales. I understand being frightened of whales because they're so big. Yeah, like Kaya, yeah, megalophobia. Like if you were in the water, like I don't know, maybe you're scuba diving and a whale comes upon you, a big whale, like a humpback or something, you'd be like, "Damn, that's a big whale," right? The size could freak you out. I get that. But when I'm just seeing them on television, I think to myself, boy, those are some majestic whales. I don't care if they have barnacles. They're not gross. They're beautiful, right? Um, so should we stop looking for Bigfoot? No, I don't think so. I think we should keep looking for Bigfoot. I don't think we're going to find Bigfoot. We might find some other interesting creatures. And you might, it's not about finding Bigfoot. It's not really about that. I'll get to that in a minute. But just think, like these guys spent 8 seasons or 7 seasons trying to find Bigfoot, never found a type specimen, never found definitive evidence for Bigfoot. It seems a little bit like they're just out having fun, which is fine. But consider this. Consider a show like this one, River Monsters, which I was a pretty big fan of. I still am. Who's seen? I mean, okay, who's seen Finding Bigfoot, and who has seen River Monsters, hosted by Jeremy Wade? Certainly, some of you must have watched River Monsters. I wonder what kind of fish this is. It's like some kind of big old catfish. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's not a bad show to fall asleep to. No, I'm not saying it's boring, but it is you can watch it or you can have it on in the background. It works either way. You know, there are some episodes on YouTube, and I think this is what a show like first, let's be clear. Both River Monsters and Finding Bigfoot are entertainment. That's what they are, right? But I think River Monsters is how you do this kind of entertainment right, right? Jeremy Wade is a biologist by training. I think he was a biology teacher for years, in fact, and also an extreme angler. He got into fishing when he was in England. That's where he's from. He's from England. It learned to fish in England and then decided he wanted to catch bigger fish. So he went to India, spent a few months in India trying to catch some big fish. And I guess he just got the fishing bug, you know. He started learning about all of these big giant fish that live in rivers and lakes all around the world, and he wanted to catch them all, not to eat or as trophies. But as a biologist, you know, Wade is also a conservationist, and part of that is actually getting out there and seeing how the creatures are doing in their natural environment. So, you know, it's all catch and release with Jeremy Wade. I mean, I think there was one episode where he didn't let the fish go, but the fish was dying and he ended up like just leaving it with the villagers who were taking him fishing, so they had like a big feast. So like, you know, it's not like the fish's life was wasted or anything. But otherwise, yeah, it's all catch and release for Jeremy Wade. But why do I say this is the right way to do this kind of entertainment? Well, a lot of the time, it started off, an episode would start off a little sensational, right? Like, oh, children disappearing under the water. You know, that's a terrible Jeremy Wade impression, but you know, it's like, what's under there? Is it some kind of monster? Is it this thing that the local people say? Or is it a fish or a crocodile or whatever? And then he'd go out and like catch that creature and show you what it is, right? Um, and his goal was education, right? It starts off a little bit sensational. Like, one of the first episodes I think is about the piranha, you know, and he looks at this claim about this busload of children that was devoured by piranhas, and like he looks into it and he can't find any evidence that it actually happened, right? So he kind of debunks where he needs to and educates where he needs to. And here's the cool thing about this show. They ended it after he caught all the fish. In a statement, which you can read from this, quoted in this Looper article, Wade said, 10 years ago, I had a list in my head which seemed impossibly ambitious at the time, but everything has now been ticked off and then some. They they would set out with a plan, catch the catch whatever they were aiming to catch, show it to the audience, say like, okay, this is why they're frightening stories or why this creature is associated with monsters from folklore. But here it is. What it actually is this fish that I've caught. And they had to end the show because they caught everything thing that they set out to catch. Finding Bigfoot did not find Bigfoot. Jeremy Wade caught every fish he aimed to, and he educated while he did it. So I think that's an interesting little comparison. Again, this is not scholarly material by any stretch of the imagination. This is entertainment. But I like to think that, you know, this is the way to do it, not the Finding Bigfoot way or the Ancient Aliens way. So, you know, don't be a Bobo, be a Jeremy Wade. If you wish to search for Bigfoot or other cryptids, I actually say knock yourselves out. You're not going to find Bigfoot. But as a student of mine once remarked, the real Bigfoot was the friends we made along the way. We're not going to find Bigfoot, but we might have some fun experiences together. Same goes for UFO hunting. Same goes for going on a ghost adventure, like a ghost tour. You're not going to find the supernatural entity that you're looking for, but you might have a fun time with your friends. And I do actually think that's valuable. And I will say, okay, maybe if you're a Bigfoot believer, you want to hang on to this idea that Bigfoot exists. That's great. Um, but there are other creatures out there that are just as fascinating, more fascinating. Speaking of Jeremy Wade, when I was in North Bay, I went fishing. I went fishing for the first time in years, and I had a lot of fun. I did not catch a single fish, but I had a lot of fun. I was out in Callender Bay on Lake Nipissing, a little bit outside of North Bay. Didn't catch a fish, but I saw this fella. Callender Bay has a nesting pair of bald eagles, which are fascinating birds. Um, and I watched them going fishing. This one, I believe, is the female, would fly over out onto the lake and return with a fish in her talons for her chicks. And you could hear them making their cute little eagle noises. They don't make those screeching hawk noises. They make these cute little eagle noises, and it's very cute for such a deadly predator. 20 years ago, this would have been so rare because lots of different species of birds, um, their numbers were declining owing to the use of DDT, which was a pesticide. What DDT did, unfortunately, was it messed with the eggs, so that the eggshell doesn't properly protect the eggs, and so the birds have a heck of a time reproducing because their eggs just don't hatch because the embryo in the egg dies. We've stopped using DDT, and now a lot of birds are making a comeback, including these guys. So 20 years ago, if I had gone fishing in Lake Nipissing, I almost certainly would not have seen a bald eagle. This is probably the fifth or sixth bald eagle I've seen in North Bay now in 2025. Most of them are actually at the dump. It's not a very romantic idea, but I went to the dump and there were like four or five bald eagles, lots of turkey vultures, ravens, crows, obviously seagulls. But the eagles were very striking. One flew above my head, maybe 30 feet above my head, and I was just like, wow. Oh, it was so magical. So if you're going to go out looking for beautiful creatures, go out and look for creatures that really exist because they're so beautiful and so amazing. And and you know what? It really reminds one of our duty of stewardship toward nature, right? We've got to take care of this beautiful planet and all the amazing life forms on it. We really do. Yeah, that's why they're at the dump. It's the meat and the bones. Oh yeah, we have ospreys too, Will, in North Bay. I'd seen a lot of ospreys, but now within the last few years, I'm seeing a lot of eagles. I did actually see an osprey here in Ottawa once. It was last summer, and I was going for a walk in Strathcona Park, and there was an osprey above the Rideau River in Strathcona Park. Just kind of, you know how they hover and then they wait until they see a fish and they dive? It was just hovering up there. He didn't catch any fish. But yeah, osprey are beautiful birds. It is sad that they're at the dump. It is like a commentary. Of course, they don't just hang out there. On the Nipissing First Nation, there's a fishing industry there. So they fish walleye or pickerel from Lake Nipissing. Man, pickerel, by the way, everybody up, I know technically it's walleye. Everybody up there calls it pickerel. So I'm just using my local vernacular. But it's good eating. And it's so good that you don't even have to go fishing. Local fishermen catch it and sell it at the grocery store. So if you're in North Bay and you want pickerel and you can't go fishing, chances are you can get it at the grocery store. Pretty cool, but it's good eating. Um, and so at these little fisheries on the lake, the bald eagles will hang out there too. Because it's so easy for them to get food. They don't have to go fishing. They just take the scraps, all the guts and bones and extra flesh. And it's actually better for the eagles. I know it's sad, like, oh, they're eating in the dump, but it is easier for the eagles. because it's hard to catch a fish. I think it's amazing that they're able to do this. You know, they're flying above the lake and they see a fish and they go and they dive down and grab it. Imagine the skill. So it's certainly easier at the dump or at the fishery. But you're right, it is kind of sad that it's funny when I think back, like the first time I had seen one of these majestic creatures in the wild was at the dump. This beautiful bird that's come back from the brink of, extinction at the dump. Like, so, um, I want to close this off by asking you, what kind of creatures have you seen or would you like to see? And how did that feel? And do you think do you think that if you saw Bigfoot, you would feel like that? Like I had always wanted to see a bald eagle in nature. And when I finally did, I was so thrilled because I'd seen them at the zoo, but not in nature. And then I saw them at the dump, and now I've seen them when I fish. And every time I see them, it's just such a treat. And I feel this like, oh, wow, so cool. Like, I'm so happy that I saw that. Have you ever seen a creature that made you have that feeling? I mean, some people aren't super into wildlife, but I guess I always have been. Kai does not want to see Bigfoot. Fair. Yeah. Yeah, maybe Bigfoot is just a guy and he just lives out there. He doesn't want anything to do with people. He's maybe Bigfoot is just a misanthrope, right? So we don't want to see Bigfoot, or maybe Bigfoot is not Bigfoot at all, but well, that would be like the original Sasquatch, just a big hairy person lives in the woods, right? Oh, that's funny. There was an X-Files episode like that. Wow. That's great. I should watch that. No, but really, like just to repeat the question, right? Have you seen, is there a creature you've always wanted to see that when you saw it, you were just filled with wonder? Zach says I get crazed about animals when I hear about sea creatures. They freak me out. Stuff that lives, yeah, yeah. There's something very frightening about the depths of the ocean, you know? Like, you know how we talked about the fear of very large things. I'm not frightened of the ocean, but when I think about how deep and unknown it is, I get a kind of unease. You know what I mean? Like I'm just like, what's down there? It's so dark and deep. It's a little freaky, right? All right, well maybe nobody else has an animal like I do, but I love just seeing wild animals. I think the most mundane, everyday wild animal is special and interesting. And why look for Bigfoot? Sure, maybe you'll have fun with your friends looking for Bigfoot, but I say go and look at what's really there because it's all fascinating. Like bears, yeah, Zach likes bears. It's such a treat to see bears. Aw, Will saw a family of raccoons. Yeah, raccoons are adorable. I have raccoons. They have a little highway going through here in Sandy Hill. There's actually a lot of neat wildlife in the city here. Obviously raccoons. There are a lot of skunks that I see in the summertime. Um, Foxes. I saw one time, I was going for a walk with my partner, and we saw a fox being harassed by crows. I guess this fox was messing with maybe a nest or maybe some of their food, and these crows were dive bombing it repeatedly. That was just over on Laurier, like in Sandy Hill. Amazing. Like just amazing stuff. Raccoons are so cute though. Um, Oh, the bears. Oh yeah, yeah. Well, in BC, you've got that. Those are your brown bears, right? They're the big ones. Uh, Yeah, terrifying and awesome. I think that's how I describe like a grizzly or a polar bear. Kaya's got a turkey in her neighborhood. Yeah, wild turkeys are making a comeback in urban areas. Apparently in Montreal, they've got a lot of wild turkeys, and I've seen them downtown in Ottawa as well. Leo saw a fox and a bald eagle. Oh, that would freak me out, even knowing the den is uninhabited. Very freaky. Crows are insane. Yeah, I saw a crow wash something once. Again, I was going for a walk just around the neighborhood, going down to Strathcona Park. A crow picked up a little something off the ground, dropped it in a puddle, swished it around, picked it up out of the puddle, and ate it. So cool. Yeah, coyotes. I used to see coyotes when my family did live down in southern Ontario. We lived kind of outside of about an hour's drive outside of Toronto, south of Orangeville. It's kind of like farm country. And across the field, we would see coyotes all the time. That's cool. But since moving up here, I don't really see coyotes or wolves. I think because the forest is too dense. But if you're in a place with a lot of farmland, you can see them easily because there aren't any trees to block your view. So I just ask everybody, oh, you had to ch Leo had to chase. Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, so this guy, okay. So this fellow was used to people. Yeah, yeah. A lot like the birds at the park. I go to the park and a lot of the birds are not too shy. The geese just approach me now. I think they think I'm going to feed them. I'm not going to feed them, but I think they think I'm going to. Um, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, there's enough beauty out there in the natural world. The life forms that exist now and that have existed on the planet Earth are so fascinating. I understand, I suppose, the appeal of Bigfoot and other cryptids, but don't be disappointed that they probably don't exist because there are real animals that are amazing out there that you can go and look at and learn about. And yeah, the natural world is a beautiful place. Why didn't Ogopogo become a big sensation, kind of like Bigfoot did? Well, a lot of hoaxers, as we've seen, made Bigfoot go international. But if you want to see Ogopogo, you've got to go to Okanagan Lake. If you want to see Nessie, you got to go to Loch Ness. Lake Simcoe apparently has an Igopogo. Apparently, there's a creature called Memphrey in Lake Memphremagog. Um, Certain lakes around Canada just have come to have these folkloric creatures associated with them, even though a lot of them are just rip-offs of the Ogopogo. But like we looked at today, Bigfoot is thought to live all over North America. Again, basically wherever you find black bears, right? So, that's probably why, Ogopogo has stayed sort of like a Canadian thing, but Sasquatch blew up. Because Sasquatch is the kind of creature that if it were real, you might expect to find all over North America. Unlike the Ogopogo, which, if real, just exists in the lake. Although I don't believe it's real. Um, and you've got to remember, like, um, originally Ogopogo is not an animal; it's a spirit, right? It's a spirit that lives in the lake, not like a physical being. So even if there is an Ogopogo, you shouldn't expect to actually see it in the lake because originally, like on the indigenous tradition, it's not an animal; it's a spirit. So should we believe in cryptids? Probably not. But if you want to learn more about this, you should check out the book that I've drawn this chapter from for today's class. It's called Abominable Science, Origins of the Yeti, Nessie, and Other Famous Cryptids by Loxton and Prothero. And you can access an online copy of this book at the Carleton Library. So if any of you are writing about cryptids or cryptozoology for your essays, this is a great source. So I think we should be skeptics. I think it's important to maintain a sense of curiosity and wonder about the natural world, but that's got to be balanced with skepticism. And I think that means ruling out the existence of cryptids. Um, we rediscover species from time to time, and we discover new species all the time. And maybe creatures from folklore that we think are out there as cryptids are actually just based on real creatures, right? So creatures from folklore don't really exist. We're not going to find them. But maybe the reason why such creatures exist in folklore is because they were inspired by real creatures, right? Maybe people thought up dragons because they found some dinosaur bones and they didn't know what they were, right? Well, I guess that's it for today. We're ending it a little earlier than usual. I kind of powered through this. There wasn't as much discussion as there was last time. Um, but next time it's going to be another special topics lecture. Please remember to vote in the poll by this evening. I'll let you know what topic won, and I'll deliver a lecture on that topic on Wednesday. And then for our final class next Monday, I think what we'll do is we'll review the results of the participation elements. So we'll see if people's beliefs in certain paranormal phenomena have changed. And if so, we'll talk about why. So that will be discussion based. I can also do a little AMA about the essay, right? I'm going to try and have your everything returned to you, your proposals by next week. But just in case I'm not done by class on Monday, you can still ask me anything about the essay assignment. And I'll try to answer your questions as best I can. Or indeed, ask me anything else about any other aspect of the course that you're curious about, and I'll try and answer those questions as best I can. Yeah, thanks, Martha. Yeah, like even if there aren't cryptids, I think the really interesting thing for me is understanding the origins of the cryptids. Like, why do people believe in Sasquatch or Chupacabra or Nessie, right? Where do these things come from? What inspired these beliefs? Are they based on real creatures or based on some kind of legend? Like, that's what's really interesting for me. So, yeah, now you have lots of things to look into. Well, thanks everyone. Let's wrap it up. I will see you all on Wednesday. Topic to be determined. Remember to vote. Okay. Take care, everyone.